All right, ready for a deep dive into a life that's really, well, incredible.
Sounds like it.
We're tackling Audie Murphy went from practically nothing in Texas to becoming, well, the most decorated American soldier of World War II.
Wow, that's quite a story.
It really is. And we've got a couple things to help us unpack it all. We've got excerpts from The Extraordinary Life of Audie Murphy, that's his biography, and then a really powerful World War II documentary, too.
Okay, so we're looking at both the man and the myth then.
Exactly. Because, I mean, how often do you get a story that intersects so much with how, especially back then, we thought about heroes, right?
It's true. Okay, so set the scene for us. Who was Audie Murphy before the war?
All right, so picture this. Texas, 1925. 7th out of 12 kids born into a family of sharecroppers.
Okay, so not exactly starting out with silver spoon.
Not even close. Struggling, formal education wasn't really in the cards. But there's this interesting thing. Even as a young kid, he found comfort, almost like an escape, in books. Especially stories about World War I heroes.
That detail, that early fascination with war stories, that's really telling. I mean, it makes you think about how those narratives, which often painted war in a pretty glamorous light, how they shaped his whole view of conflict. Right?
Yeah, almost like he was living in one of those stories, just longing for an adventure.
And I bet that played a part, right? I
Yeah.
mean, reality hit hard. You said it, lost both parents by 15.
Yeah, and thrust into this role of trying to support his siblings. The army, it must have seemed like a way out, a chance to escape the poverty, prove himself.
I mean, it makes sense,
Yeah.
except he didn't quite fit the bill at first, right?
Not at all. Too young, too small. They kept turning him away.
But he was persistent, clearly.
Oh, yeah, finally convinced them when he turned 18.
That really speaks to his determination.
And just like that, he finds himself in the trenches of World War II.
And Sicily, that was his first real taste of combat.
It was.
I bet that was a reality check, to say the least.
You can say that again.
Because, I mean, the documentary we watched, it doesn't shy away from that. There's actually this really powerful quote from Murphy himself about those first days.
Yeah.
He said something like, 10 seconds after the first shot was fired at him. And you could almost feel the shift in his tone. Combat was no longer glamorous.
Wow.
Quite a difference from the heroic tales, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Makes you wonder about the weight of those expectations going in, then coming face to face with what war really is. Brutal.
Right, absolutely. But even amidst all the chaos, it's like Audie's natural leadership. It just kind of rose to the surface,
Like during the Anzio beachhead battle.
That's one example.
Yeah.
His commander goes down, wounded, and Audie, he takes charge, rallies everyone together under intense fire.
Intense how?
The Germans, they were relentless. But Audie, he somehow kept it together.
Wow.
And this wasn't a one-time thing. It's like, even in Sicily, it wasn't just, pure raw courage. There was this tactical mind at work, too.
Is that where he earns the Bronze Star?
It is.
Yeah.
For single-handedly taking out a German tank.
A tank? On his own? That's almost, I don't know, superhuman.
It is remarkable, and it shows his ability to think on his feet under incredible pressure, make the right call. That's a skill that it'll really define his actions later on.
Okay, so we've got Sicily, then Anzio. But his reputation as, this fearless, skilled soldier, it really takes off during the fighting across southern France, right? I mean, the biography describes these intense moments. Like, he takes out multiple German machine gun nests, just incredible courage, tactical awareness.
Yeah. He earned the Distinguished Service Cross for that. Another high honor, obviously. But what I think is even more telling is how, it's like these acts of almost unbelievable heroism. They become almost characteristic of Murphy.
What do you mean?
It's like he was operating on this whole other level, pushing the boundaries of what anyone thought was possible on a battlefield.
And that leads us to, the legendary stand at Holtzwihr. This battle, it's almost hard to believe.
I can imagine.
It becomes this pivotal moment. It really gets to the heart of who Audie Murphy was, both as a soldier and as a person.
Okay, so picture this, right? January 26, 1945.
Yep.
The setting, Holtzwihr, France. It's here that Audie's story, it really becomes, the stuff of legends.
Yeah, and the sources we looked at, they really don't hold back on just how desperate things were for Audie and his men at this point, facing a massive German counterattack. I mean, we're talking severely outnumbered, outdone. In fact, the documentary even mentioned Audie's company, which at one point was over 200 soldiers strong. They were down to just 18.
18? Wow. Talk about, against all odds.
Exactly. And if that wasn't enough, they lost their only real heavy firepower early in the battle, left them incredibly vulnerable.
What happened?
They lost both of their M10 tank destroyers.
Then those were...
Basically their best defense against the German tanks. I mean, for listeners who maybe aren't military buffs, these tank destroyers, they were essential for taking on enemy armor. Okay, so no tank destroyers, completely outmatched. It's remarkable to think, even facing those odds, Audie, he never seemed to, falter.
It's true. And in a way, this is where we see those instincts, that leadership, really come to the forefront. He orders his remaining men to pull back, find a safer position, while he stays behind to cover their retreat.
Using himself as a shield.
Basically. And here's where, tactically speaking, he shines. He starts directing artillery fire onto the advancing enemy. Essentially, think about this, holding off this entire German advance pretty much by himself.
Wow.
And this is, I think, what's so compelling about Audie. You see this incredible physical courage, but also this incredibly sharp strategic mind. They work together.
Right. And it's at this point, I think, that the sources describe him spotting a burning American tank destroyer nearby, the same type that had been taken out earlier.
Right, and this is where the story, it takes this almost unbelievable turn, because this particular tank destroyer, it still had a working .50 caliber machine gun mounted on it. I mean, just imagine the audacity, the sheer will it must have taken for him to even consider what he did next.
Which was?
He ran for it under intense German fire. He climbed onto that burning tank destroyer and started firing back.
Are you serious?
I'm not making this up. There was a Lieutenant Vice Fenning. He saw it all firsthand, described it as something out of a movie. Audie, silhouetted against those flames, the snow, this one man, seemingly insignificant, against this whole army.
It's hard to even fathom.
It really is. And he didn't just hold them off. He started systematically directing artillery fire onto his own position.
Onto himself. Why would he?
Because he had to. I mean, it wasn't just reckless bravery, right?
Yeah.
The sources are pretty clear about that. He was calculating, using what he knew the terrain, the way the Germans thought to maximize his impact.
And it worked.
He held that position for an hour, a full hour, exposed, alone, against overwhelming odds. I mean, the odds of surviving something like that.
That's a miracle.
The sources actually say he barely escaped before the tank destroyer exploded, like fate itself intervened.
Wow.
There's no doubt luck played a part, but you can't discount that willpower, that incredible strategic brilliance, the kind it took to endure that act of defiance, this refusal to back down. It's what earned him the Medal of Honor.
Wow. The highest military decoration in the United States.
Exactly.
You'd think after all of that, the recognition, surviving something so, harrowing, he'd finally be able to rest, to find some sense of peace.
Well, the thing about war, right, it rarely ends that neatly. Both the biography, the documentary, they touch on this, how much the war took out of him, the invisible wounds he carried long after the fighting was over.
PTSD.
Among other things.
And there's that moment in the documentary, right, where he talks about the end of the war. And he says, "There's nothing that could top that for me." And you can just hear it in his voice, the weight of it all. "I saw a lot of good men come and go. Even with a medal, he couldn't escape those memories, right? All those who didn't make it home. It's heavy stuff." What happens to someone like that? After seeing so much, experiencing so much by the age of 21, it really makes you think about the stuff he carried around, the memories, the good men he lost. I mean, you don't just walk away from that.
You don't. And the sources really dig into that, how Audie's life after the war, it became this balancing act, trying to find normalcy while still dealing with, the weight of his experiences.
He struggled, didn't he?
He did. PTSD, survivor's guilt, even addiction. It's a side of war we don't often talk about, right? Those invisible wounds.
Right. It's almost like, ironic, right? You go from a war hero to a movie star.
It is interesting, isn't it?
The Hollywood thing, it's almost surreal. The biography talks about it, how he became this big name, starring in westerns, war movies.
He even played himself in the movie version of his autobiography.
To Hell and Back, right.
That's the one.
Wow. Talk about stepping back into those memories. It makes you wonder if acting, if that was his way of processing it all, making sense of the chaos.
It's possible, though I think it's important to note, the sources highlight how he used his platform, his fame, to advocate for veterans, to shine a light on those invisible wounds so many were suffering with in silence.
That's right. He could have just, lived a quiet life, enjoyed the fame, but he chose to speak out, to fight for others.
He did. And even in death, there's this sense of, humility. The documentary points out that when he was buried at Arlington, he requested a simple grave,
No gold lettering. I thought they did that for all Medal of Honor
They
recipients.
do. But Audie, he specifically asked for it to be omitted.
Wow. I don't know, that says a lot, doesn't it? The most decorated soldier, choosing a quiet, unassuming resting place. It really speaks to his character, to his humility, despite everything he went through, everything he achieved.
Audie Murphy, he was full of contradictions, shaped by the horrors of war, but also, that classic image of heroism, thrust into the world stage. Yet it seemed like he was always searching for a kind of peace that, well, that maybe he could never quite find.
A man of triumph and tragedy, really. And his story, it stays with you because it makes you consider the real cost of heroism. The battles fought not just on the front lines, but the internal ones too. Audie Murphy reminds us that behind every medal, every act of courage, there's a human being dealing with the weight of those experiences. It's a legacy that deserves to be remembered, not just with statues and speeches, but by understanding and supporting those who serve long after the fighting's done. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. How can we, each of us, better honor those quiet sacrifices made by veterans, not just today, but every day?